Nobody clapped when David Harlow walked into the linguistics division on his first day. The hallway was long, white, and filled with scholars from a dozen different species, and every single one of them looked at him like he had wandered into the wrong building. A few whispered. One tall Drahini with 4 arms and silver skin actually laughed out loud before turning away. David pretended not to notice. He carried a single bag over his shoulder and a data tablet tucked under his arm. He was 34 years old, brown-haired, average height, and thoroughly unremarkable by galactic standards. Humans had only been part of the Galactic Compact for about 60 years. They were still the new species, still proving themselves, still being watched. His assigned office was on the lower level of Station Orville, far from the bright labs and grand lecture halls where the real scholars worked. The room was barely big enough for a desk and a chair. The ventilation rattled. The light above his head flickered twice before settling into a dull yellow glow. David sat down, opened his tablet, and got to work. His research proposal had already been submitted and approved barely. He wanted to reconstruct Old Speak, the written and spoken language of the Aori, a civilization that had vanished from the galaxy over 12,000 years ago. No one knew exactly what had happened to them. They had simply disappeared, leaving behind fragments of text carved into ruins scattered across a handful of dead worlds. Most galactic scholars considered Old Speak a closed subject. The language had been cataloged, partially translated, and filed away centuries ago. There was nothing left to learn from it. That was the general opinion. David disagreed, but he had spent 3 years on Earth studying the existing Aori fragments. He believed the accepted translations were wrong. Not all of them, but enough to matter. The grammar had been misread. Sentence structures had been forced into patterns borrowed from living languages, and the result was a mess of bad assumptions built on top of other bad assumptions. Nobody wanted to hear that on his 3rd evening at the station, there was a faculty gathering in the main hall. David attended because Fenwick Goss, his only human colleague, told him it would look bad if he didn't. Fenwick was a cultural historian, older, cautious, and far more experienced at navigating alien academic politics. "Just smile and don't argue with anyone," Fenwick said as they walked in. David managed the smiling part for about 20 minutes. Then Renith Salt arrived. Renna was the head of the linguistics division. She was Drahini, nearly 7 feet tall, 4-armed, with pale silver skin and eyes like polished steel. She moved through the room like she owned it, because in many ways she did. Every research grant, every publication, every career in the division passed through her approval. She noticed David standing near the back wall and walked straight toward him. "You are the human linguist," she said. It was not a question. "David Harlow," he said, extending his hand. She did not take it. "I have read your proposal," Renith said, loud enough for the nearby scholars to hear. "You wish to reconstruct Old Speak. You believe our translations are incorrect." "Some of them," David said carefully. "I think the grammar models need revision." Renna tilted her head. The Aori grammar models were established by the Kalvari Institute 400 years ago, verified by 3 independent research bodies, accepted across the compact. "I know," David said, "and I think they got it wrong." The room went quiet around them. Several scholars turned to watch. Renna smiled. Not warmly. "Humans have a peculiar habit," she said. "You collect dead things. Dead bones. Dead words. Dead cultures. You dig through the remains of others and convince yourselves you have found treasure." She paused. "Old Speak is a curiosity for museum plaques. Nothing more." A few scholars chuckled. One made a sound that David was fairly sure was the Miralan equivalent of a snort. David felt his face get warm, but he kept his voice steady. "Maybe, but I would like the chance to prove otherwise." Renna studied him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked away without another word. Fenwick appeared at his side. "Well, that could have gone worse." "How?" David asked. "She could have had your funding pulled on the spot." "She still might." Fenwick put a hand on his shoulder. "Listen, I like you, but this place runs on reputation, and right now, you have none. Be careful." David went back to his office that night. He pulled up the Aori text fragment he had been working on, a short passage recovered from a ruin on a moon called Drevith. The accepted translation read it as a trade record. a list of goods exchanged between settlements. But David saw something different. The verb forms were wrong. The tense markers didn't match a trade record. When he rebuilt the sentence using his own grammatical model, the meaning shifted completely. It was not a list of goods that it was a set of instructions. Instructions for what? He did not yet know that he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. The station was quiet at this hour. Most of the scholars had gone to sleep. The only sound was the soft rattle of ventilation and the hum of his tablet. Then he heard something else, a low, deep vibration. Not from the ventilation, not from any machine he could identify. It came from below, somewhere far beneath the lower levels, deep in the bones of the station itself. David sat very still and listened. The vibration lasted about 10 seconds, then faded. He looked down at his tablet. The old speak text glowed on the screen, the reconstructed words sitting neatly in rows. He told himself it was nothing, just the station settling, just pipes or power conduits doing whatever they did in the middle of the night. That he almost believed it. The vibration came again the next night. And the night after that, David started keeping a log. Every occurrence happened between the late hours, when the station was at its quietest. The sound was always the same, a low, steady hum that rose from somewhere deep below the lower levels, lasted between 8 and 15 seconds, and then vanished. No one else mentioned it. Either they could not hear it, or they did not care. David cared. He pulled up the station's structural blueprints on his tablet and traced the layout downward. Below the lower offices was a maintenance level. Below that, storage. And below storage, marked with a restricted access symbol, was something called the Scriptum Vault. He had heard of it during his orientation. The vault was a sealed archive built into the station's foundation. It held original writings from dozens of extinct civilizations, physical artifacts too fragile or too important to be stored anywhere else. Access was limited to senior scholars with special clearance from the Council of Tongues. David did not have clearance. He was the most junior researcher in the entire division. He applied anyway. The request went to the council, and 3 days later he received a short, formal denial. No explanation, no appeal process. Just the word denied stamped across his screen in red text. He was not surprised. But he was not ready to give up. He went to Fenwick first. I need to get into the Scriptum Vault. Fenwick stared at him. You have been here less than 2 weeks. I know, but there is something happening down there. I can hear it. Fenwick leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. David, listen to me. I have been on this station for 9 years. I have seen people smarter than both of us combined get chewed up and thrown out because they pushed too hard, too fast. Renith Salt does not forget. She does not forgive. And right now, you're already on her list. I'm not trying to fight anyone, David said. I just want to look at the Aori texts in that vault, then publish something first. Build your reputation. Earn the clearance the right way. David knew Fenwick was right. But the hum kept coming every night, and he could not ignore it. That was when Tovish found him. Tovish was a Miralan, small, barely 4 feet tall, with damp greenish skin and wide black eyes that blinked sideways. Miralan were an amphibious species, quiet by nature, and Tovish was quieter than most. He worked as a research assistant in the Linguistics Division, filing documents and running errands for the senior scholars. He appeared at David's office door one evening and stood there for a full minute before speaking. I heard what you said at the council hearing, Tovish said. His voice was soft and wet, like someone talking through a mouthful of water. About the Aori grammar, the verb tenses. David looked up from his tablet. You were there. I'm always there. Nobody notices me. Tovish stepped inside and closed the door. You are right about the translations. I found the same errors 2 years ago. David sat up straight. What happened? I reported it to my supervisor. She told me to stop looking into it. She said the translations were established and that questioning them would embarrass the Institute. Tovish's sideways blink was slow and deliberate. I stopped. I should not have. David studied the small alien for a moment. Why are you telling me this now? Because you did not stop, Tovish said. And because I know a way to get close to the vault. The maintenance corridors beneath the storage level were narrow, poorly lit, and smelled like recycled coolant. Tovish moved through them with ease. David had to duck to avoid hitting his head on low-hanging pipes. These corridors run along the outer wall of the vault, Tovish whispered. Maintenance crews use them once a month. No one comes down here otherwise. They reached a section of corridor where the wall changed. Instead of plain metal, the surface was covered in something darker. A smooth, almost black material etched with faint markings. That is the vault wall, Tovish said. The outer shell. David pressed his hand against it. It was warm, not hot, but noticeably warmer than the surrounding metal. And up close, the markings were unmistakable. They were old speak. His heart started beating faster. He pulled out his tablet and sat down on the cold floor, his back against the opposite wall, facing the vault's outer surface. What are you doing? Tovish asked. Talking. David said that he wrote a passage and reconstructed old speak on his tablet, a formal greeting. The kind of opening he believed the Aori would have used when addressing a stranger for the first time. He had pieced it together from fragments, filling in gaps with his best guesses that he held the tablet up toward the wall, the screen facing the dark surface, the glowing old speak text clearly visible. Nothing happened for a long time. Then the hum started that IT was louder here. Much louder. David felt it in his chest, in his teeth, in the floor beneath him. The markings on the vault wall began to shift. Faintly at first, then more clearly, the etched symbols rearranged themselves, sliding across the dark surface like living things. They formed a line of text. David lowered his tablet and stared. The symbols were old speak. Clear, perfect old speak. Not the broken fragments found on dead moons, but fluid and precise. He translated the line in his head, word by word, his hands trembling. Who speaks? Tovish grabbed David's arm. It answered you. David could not breathe. He looked at the wall, at the ancient words glowing faintly on its surface, and he understood something that no scholar on this station had ever considered. The vault was not just a storage room that IT was listening. 2 words. That was all it took to change everything David Harlow believed about his work, about the Aori, and about the galaxy itself. 2 words glowing on a dark wall in a forgotten maintenance corridor beneath Station Orville. Who speaks? He did not sleep that night. He sat in his small office with the door locked, replaying what had happened, writing down every detail before his memory could change it. The symbols had moved. The wall had responded. Something inside the scriptum vault had read his old speak greeting and answered IT was impossible. The Aori had been gone for 12,000 years. Their language was classified as dead. Their civilization was dust. And yet, something built into the bones of that vault was still awake that he told Fenwick the next morning. Fenwick listened without interrupting. When David finished, the older man sat quietly for a long time, staring at the table between them. You are sure? Fenwick said. It was not a question. I watched the symbols move. Tovish saw it too. And you wrote a greeting in old speak, and it responded with a question. Yes. Fenwick ran a hand through his graying hair. David, do you understand what will happen if you report this through official channels? Renith will bury it. She will say you fabricated the data. She will have your access revoked and your contract terminated. I know. So what are you going to do? David looked at him steadily. I'm going back tonight, and I'm going to answer it. He returned to the maintenance corridor after midnight, Tovish at his side. The small Miralan was nervous, his damp skin paler than usual, his wide eyes darting in every direction. But he came. David respected that. They reached the same section of wall. David sat down on the floor, opened his tablet, and began writing. This time, he composed a longer passage. A formal response in old speak, identifying himself. He wrote his name, his species, and his purpose, that he was a student of their language, that he had come to learn, and that he wished to understand. He held the tablet toward the wall. The hum began almost immediately, deeper than before. The markings on the vault's surface stirred, then flowed like water, rearranging into lines of crisp, perfect text. David translated as fast as he could, whispering the words to Tovish. You speak with errors, but you speak. Who taught you? David's throat tightened. He wrote back carefully, choosing every word. No one taught me. I learned from the pieces your people left behind. Your words were scattered across dead worlds. I gathered them and tried to understand. A pause. The wall went still. Then new text appeared, slower this time, as if the intelligence behind it was choosing its own words with equal care. Our words were not scattered. They were planted. You are the first to grow them. David stared at the sentence. Planted, not lost, not abandoned. Planted, like seeds left in soil, waiting for rain. He wrote again. Your people, the Aori, where did they go? The galaxy believes you are extinct. The response came faster now. We are not gone. We are waiting. We have been waiting for a very long time. Tovish grabbed David's sleeve. Ask it what it is, he whispered. David wrote the question. What are you? Are you a machine? A program? A recording? The wall hummed. The text shifted and reformed. We are memory. We are voice. We are everything our people were, held inside the shape of our words. We were built to sleep until someone remembered how to speak to us. David felt cold despite the warmth of the corridor. He was not talking to a computer or an archive. He was talking to a civilization. The entire Aori people, or some preserved echo of them, encoded into their own language and sealed inside this vault. Why? He wrote. Why did you do this? Because something was coming. We called it the silence. We could not stop it. We could not run from it. So we hid ourselves in the only place the silence could not reach, inside our words. Words do not die unless they are forgotten. David sat with that for a long moment. An entire species had faced extinction and chosen to survive by becoming language. Not technology, not weapons, not ships. Language, and they had waited 12,000 years for someone to speak it. Why did no one find you before now? David asked. Many have read our words. Many have cataloged them, studied them, filed them in archives. But none of them spoke to us. They treated our language as a dead thing, a specimen to examine. You were the first to use it as it was meant to be used, as a living voice. David felt something tight in his chest. He thought about Rena's words at the faculty gathering. Humans collect dead things. She had said it like an insult, but maybe that was exactly the point. Humans did not just collect dead things. They tried to bring them back. They learned dead languages not to study them, but to speak them. They rebuilt ancient instruments not to display them, but to play them. The wall pulsed once more, and a final line appeared. We have a question for you, but you do not yet have enough of our language to understand it. Will you return? David wrote one word in Old Speak, the simplest word he knew. Yes. The symbols dimmed. The hum faded. The corridor went quiet. Tovish let out a shaky breath. What do we do now? David stood up and tucked his tablet under his arm. His hands were still trembling, but his voice was steady. Now, I learn more Old Speak. The alarm started on a Tuesday. David was in his office, deep in a new reconstruction of Old Speak verb forms, when every panel in the corridor outside flashed amber. A station-wide alert scrolled across his tablet. Unusual energy readings detected in the lower infrastructure. Source unknown. All non-essential personnel were asked to remain in their assigned sections, that he knew immediately. The vault was waking up. Over the past 2 weeks, David had returned to the maintenance corridor 6 more times. Each visit, the intelligence inside the vault grew more responsive. It taught him new words, corrected his grammar, and slowly expanded his understanding of Old Speak in ways that no fragment or ruin could have. The language was alive in there, complete and whole, and it was pouring itself into him like water into a dry cup. But with each conversation, the energy the vault produced grew stronger. David had noticed it. Warmer walls, brighter symbols, longer hums that echoed through the corridors even after he left. The intelligence was not just responding to him. It was reaching outward, pressing against its own containment, trying to connect with the station's systems. And now the station had noticed. The Council of Tongues called an emergency session that afternoon. David attended as a spectator, sitting in the back row of the great circular chamber, while 24 senior scholars debated what was happening beneath their feet. Renith Salt stood at the center, commanding the room as always. The energy signatures are coming from the Scriptum Vault, she announced. Our engineers believe there may be a containment failure in the preservation systems. I have ordered additional shielding installed around the vault perimeter. An elder Drahini scholar raised one of his 4 hands. Has anything inside the vault been disturbed? Nothing has been accessed. Renith said firmly. The vault seals are intact. This is a mechanical issue. We will resolve it. David sat still and said nothing. But he watched the energy data displayed on the chamber's main screen, and his stomach dropped. The spikes were not random. They followed patterns, rhythmic, structured, repeating. They were sentences. The vault was trying to talk to the station, and the station's systems were treating it as a malfunction. After the session, Tovish found him in the corridor. The Miralan looked terrible. His skin was almost gray, and his wide eyes were full of fear. "It is getting louder," Tovish whispered. "I can hear it from my quarters now. That hum, it never stops." "I know," David said. "You have to tell them. If Renith puts more shielding around the vault, she might damage it. She might silence it permanently." Fenwick appeared behind them, his face grim. "He is right, David. This is not a game anymore. Whatever is in that vault is trying to reach out, and if the wrong people react the wrong way, it could be destroyed." David closed his eyes. He had wanted more time, more language, more understanding. But the vault was not waiting for him to be ready. "Fine," he said. "I will tell them." He requested an audience with the full council the next morning. Renith tried to block it, but the energy spikes had grown strong enough to trigger secondary alarms overnight, and the council was nervous enough to hear anyone with information. David stood in the center of the circular chamber, surrounded by the most powerful scholars in the Galactic Compact. Renith stood to his left, her steel eyes fixed on him like a blade. He did not waste time with introductions. "The energy readings are not a malfunction," he said. "They are language. The vault is speaking. Silence. Then murmurs. Then Renith's sharp voice cutting through. That is absurd." David held up his tablet and displayed his translation logs. Every conversation he had recorded with the vault intelligence over the past 2 weeks. Dates, times, original old speak text, and his translations. "I have been communicating with an intelligence inside the vault," he said. "It responds in old speak. It is not a recording or a simple program. It is a preserved consciousness, the collective memory of the Aori civilization." The murmurs became shouts. Several scholars stood. One elderly Kalvari researcher gripped the edge of her seat with trembling hands. Renith stepped forward. "This is fabrication. This human has been accessing restricted areas without authorization and is now presenting fantasy as fact to cover his own misconduct. I demand his immediate removal." David opened his mouth to respond, but he never got the chance. Every screen in the chamber flickered. Every display panel on the walls, every tablet in every scholar's hand, every projection surface in the room. All of them went dark for exactly 2 seconds. Then they lit up again, all of them showing the same thing, that a single line of old speak text. The room went completely silent. Dozens of alien eyes turned to the glowing symbols, and then turned to David. The only person in the room who could read them, he did not need his notes. He had seen enough old speak by now to read it on sight. His voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the chamber, every word carried. It says, "The one who speaks our words stands among you. Listen to him." Renith's face went pale. The elder Drahini, who had spoken yesterday, whispered something David barely caught. They were not supposed to leave anything behind. The mockery was over. The laughter had stopped. And for the first time since David Harlow had arrived on Station Orville, every scholar in the room was looking at him. Not with amusement, not with pity, but with fear. The dead tongue had spoken for itself. For 12,000 years, the door had not opened. It opened now. David stood at the entrance to the scriptum vault with Tovish beside him and a security detail of 6 armed officers behind them. The Council of Tongues had debated for 18 straight hours after the incident in the chamber. Some wanted the vault destroyed. Others wanted it studied from a distance. A few wanted to pretend the whole thing had never happened, that in the end, they had no choice. The intelligence inside was growing more active by the hour. Energy pulses rippled through the station systems every few minutes, and the only person it would communicate with was the junior human linguist who had taught himself a dead language in a tiny office on the lower level. Renith Salt was not part of the team. She had argued against opening the vault until the very last vote. When the council overruled her, she had left the chamber without a word. David had seen her face as she walked out. It was not anger. It was something closer to shame. The vault door was massive, 10 feet tall, made of the same dark material as the outer wall, covering old speak script that shifted and pulsed with faint light. When David stepped forward and placed his hand against it, the symbols flared bright, then rearranged themselves into a single word. Enter. The door slid open without a sound. Inside, the vault was nothing like David had expected. He had imagined shelves, cases, carefully preserved artifacts behind glass. Instead, the chamber was vast and circular, with walls that curved upward into a dome high above. Every surface was covered in writing. Old speak text flowed across the walls like rivers, moving and shifting constantly, thousands of lines of script alive and breathing. Tovish made a small sound beside him. The security officers stopped at the threshold, unwilling to go further. David walked in alone. The moment he crossed into the chamber, the writing changed. It stopped flowing and gathered toward him, converging on the section of wall directly in front of him. The symbols arranged themselves into clear, readable lines. You came. We have waited long for this. David's voice echoed in the dome. I am here. Tell me who you are. The text rippled, and new words formed, slower now, more deliberate, as if the intelligence wanted to make sure he understood every word. We are the Aori, not one voice, all voices. Every scholar, every farmer, every child, every elder. When our world faced the silence, we chose to survive the only way we could. We wrote ourselves into our own language. Every memory, every thought, every song, encoded into the structure of old speak itself. David felt his knees go weak. He had understood this in theory from his earlier conversations through the wall. But standing inside the vault, surrounded by the living text of an entire civilization, the reality of it hit him like a wave. These were not just words. They were people, billions of them, compressed into language, waiting in the dark. What is the silence? He asked. The text shifted, and for the first time, David sensed something like sadness in the way the symbols moved, slower, heavier, as if the words themselves carried weight. The silence is what comes when a civilization is forgotten completely. Not destroyed, not conquered, forgotten. When no one remembers your name, your songs, your stories, when no trace of you exists in any living mind, the silence takes you. It is not death. It is erasure, as if you never existed at all. David stood very still. Is it real? A force? An entity? It is the natural end of all things that are not remembered. We saw it coming for us. Our worlds were dying. Our people were scattered. Other species had already moved on, already forgotten our name. So we built this vault. We planted fragments of our language across the galaxy. And we waited. For what? For someone who would care enough to learn. Someone who would find our words and not just catalog them, but speak them. Someone who would treat a dead language as a living thing. The text paused. Then a new line appeared, and David read it with a tightness in his chest that made it hard to breathe. Every species that found our writings studied them, filed them, and moved on. In 12,000 years, not one of them tried to speak old speak. Not one of them sat down and learned it, word by word, mistake by mistake, the way you did. Why? David whispered. Why did no one else try? Because to them, a dead language has no value. It produces nothing. It solves nothing. It is a relic. The symbols brightened. But humans are different. Humans preserve languages that only a handful of people still speak. Humans rebuild instruments that no one plays. Humans read books that were written thousands of years ago and weep at the words. You do not see the past as dead. You see it as sleeping. David said nothing for a long time. The vault hummed around him, warm and alive, the text on the walls shifting gently like breath. Then the intelligence asked the question it had been waiting 12,000 years to ask. Will you carry our words forward? Will you speak for us so that the silence cannot take us? David thought about Renith, about the laughter in the faculty hall, about every scholar who had called his work pointless. He thought about every dead language on earth that someone had fought to save. He looked up at the living walls of the vault, at the voices of billions written in light, and he answered an old speak point one word. The first word the Aori had taught him. Always. 3 months later, nobody laughed at David Harlow anymore. The Galactic Academic Institute had changed. Not in obvious ways. The corridors were the same. The labs still hummed. The scholars still argued over footnotes and funding. But something deeper had shifted, like a crack in a foundation that forced the entire building to settle differently. The knowledge pouring out of the scriptum vault was staggering. Every day, David spent hours inside the chamber, reading the living walls, translating the voices of an entire civilization that had preserved itself in ink and grammar. The Aori had been advanced in ways the galaxy had never imagined, not in weapons or engines, but in medicine, philosophy, mathematics, ecology. They had mapped star systems that no living species had ever visited. They had developed treatments for diseases that still plagued a dozen worlds. They had written poetry that made even the coldest Drahini scholars sit in silence after hearing the translations. But the knowledge was only part of it. The vault also held voices. Individual voices. An Aori mother singing to her child. A farmer describing the color of his fields at sunset. An old woman telling a joke that made Tovish laugh so hard he had to leave the room. These are not data files. They were memories. Personal, messy, beautiful, and heartbreakingly ordinary. David shared everything openly. He published translations daily, made them available to every species in the Galactic Compact, and refused every offer to sell exclusive access. The Council of Tongues established a new department to manage the work, the Division of Preserved Voices, and named David as its head. Tovish was his first official research partner. The small Miralan had turned out to be a gifted linguist in his own right, with a natural ear for old-speak phonetics that surprised even David. Together, they built a team of 12 translators from 8 different species, all working to bring the Aori's words into the present. The galaxy paid attention. News of the discovery spread across the compact within weeks. Delegations arrived at Station Orville from worlds David had never heard of, all wanting to see the vault, to hear the voices, to understand how an entire civilization had hidden itself inside a language and survived 12,000 years of silence. Some of them were afraid. A few demanded the vault be sealed again, arguing that the Aori intelligence was dangerous, unpredictable, too powerful to be trusted. David fought those arguments in every council session, and he won every time. Not because he was a brilliant debater, but because the Aori themselves were the best argument he had. Their words were gentle. Their knowledge was given freely. They asked for nothing except to be remembered. Renith Salt came to see him on a quiet evening, 6 weeks after the vault had been opened. David was in his new office, a proper one this time, on the upper level, with windows that looked out onto the stars. He was reviewing a translation of an Aori astronomical survey when Renith appeared in his doorway. She stood there for a moment, her forearms folded, her silver face unreadable. "May I come in?" she asked. David nodded. Renith sat across from him. She did not speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was quieter than David had ever heard it. In Drahini culture, a dead language is a mark of failure. It means that people were too weak to survive. We do not study dead languages. We do not preserve them. We consider them shameful. David listened. "I treated your work as foolish because that is what I was taught to believe. That looking backward is weakness. That the past is a burden." She paused. "I was wrong." David leaned back in his chair. "You were not the only one." "No, but I was the loudest." Renith met his eyes. "I will not ask for your forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I understand now why humans do what they do." "Why is that?" "Because you do not see dead things when you look at the past. You see unfinished conversations." She stood, and apparently, you were stubborn enough to finish them. She left without another word. David watched her go, and for the first time since arriving on Station Orville, he felt like the ground beneath him was solid. The weeks turned into months. The division of preserved voices grew. Other dead languages across the galaxy were re-examined, and in 3 cases, similar patterns were found. Faint traces of intelligence woven into the structure of the words, sleeping, waiting, hoping someone would speak. David's team revived them all. On the anniversary of his first conversation with the vault, David sat alone in the chamber after everyone else had gone. The walls glowed softly, the old-speak text drifting in slow, peaceful patterns. He had learned enough of the language by now to read it as easily as English. He wrote a message on his tablet and held it up. "Are you happy?" The response came slowly, the symbols forming with a warmth that David had come to recognize as something close to affection. "We are heard. For 12,000 years, we spoke into the dark, and no one answered. Now someone answers. Yes, we are happy." David smiled. He set the tablet down and simply sat with them, with the billions of voices that had trusted their existence to their own words and waited in faith that someone, somewhere, would be curious enough and stubborn enough to listen that a new line appeared on the wall. The last thing the Aori said to him that night: "You humans mourn what others forget. That is why the dead trust you with their voices." David read it once. Then he read it again. Then he picked up his tablet and started learning a new dead language. There were more voices out there, sleeping in the dark, and he was not going to let them stay silent.